Good day, everyone. I am Malin Pahuya Vidal, and I am here to present our research study conducted together with my partner, Ma'am Farima Tangote. On behalf of my research partner, it is my honor to share our study titled Leadership Practices, School Climate, and Inclusive Education in Public Secondary School Implications for Policy Driven Educational Governance. This research explores how leadership behaviors and school climate contribute to the implementation of inclusive education and how these findings can guide policy-driven educational governance in Philippine public schools. Leadership is the foundation of every successful school. In the Philippines, our classrooms are diverse, with learners of varying languages, cultures, and abilities. The Department of Education upholds inclusion through Republic Acts 9155 and 10533, and through DepEd orders such as 72 series of 2009 and 44 series of 2021 and 23 series of 2022. These policies strengthen equitable access to education, and participatory governance. However, the reality in many schools shows a gap between policy and implementation. This study examines how leadership practices and school climate can bridge that gap to make inclusion a lived reality for all learners. Although previous studies have discussed leadership or inclusion separately. Few have examined their combined influence on school climate and inclusive education in the Philippine context. There is a lack of empirical evidence linking DepEd's inclusion policies with their implementation in schools. Our study addresses this gap by exploring how leadership and school climate interact to shape inclusive practices, offering new insights for policy driven educational governance. This research is anchored on five theories. We have transformational leadership theory, distributed leadership theory, school climate theory, ecological systems theory, social model of disability. And so, together, these theories position leadership as the key to shaping inclusive, supportive, and policy aligned schools. Objective of the study to identify leadership styles that foster an inclusive school climate, examine school climate in terms of trust, safety, and inclusivity, analyze how leadership supports inclusive teaching practices, and of course, determine if school climate mediates leadership and inclusion. For the statement of the problem, this study sought to answer five core questions, focusing on the profile of the respondents, the nature of leadership practices and school climate, the extent of inclusive education implementation, and the relationships among these variables. Through these, the research aimed to identify how leadership and school climate influence inclusion and what this implies for governance and policy. The conceptual framework shows that leadership practices such as communication, collaboration, mentorship, equitable resource allocation, and school climate, safety, trust, positive relationships, teaching, learning support, and inclusivity, and of course, the inclusive education, wherein the aspect on attitudes, inclusive teaching strategies, and level of learner participation, how enhances inclusive education practices. The demographic factors such as age, gender, length of service, educational attainment are considered the variable as part of this research. For the methods, the study employed a descriptive correlational design supported by qualitative methods. It was conducted among 15 teachers from selected public secondary school in Misamis Oriental Region 10. Data were collected using a survey, a focus group discussion, and a key informant interviews to gain both and contextual perspective or the qualitative results. For the result, this is the profile of the respondents based on their age, gender, length of service, in inclusive education and educational attainment. Next, we have here the result on leadership practices of school leaders. The result revealed that school leaders demonstrate strong leadership practices, especially in communication, mentorship, and collaboration. Teachers perceive their principals as approachable and supportive, promoting shared vision and teamwork. However, resource allocation scored slightly lower, showing that material and financial challenge uh, continue to affect inclusive initiatives. While the school climate was rated high overall, trust and positive relationships emerged as the strongest indicators. Teacher felt safe, valued, and supported, contributing to a healthy and inclusive working environment that enhances teaching and learning. The result of teacher attitudes toward inclusive education. Inclusive education practices were rated very high, wherein teachers displayed positive attitudes towards diversity, used differentiated strategies, and encouraged full learner participation. These findings demonstrate that inclusion is increasingly embedded in classroom practice aligned with DepEd's inclusive education framework. This is the correlation matrix wherein correlation analysis revealed strong positive relationships among all three variables: effective leaderships, healthy school climate, and both significantly enhanced inclusive education practices. These results confirm that leadership and climate are crucial for achieving inclusive, policy aligned education. And we have the qualitative findings revealed three key themes. First, we have collaborative leadership as a powering force to inclusion. Second, we have trust building and emotional safety. And the third one, support structures and capacity development. For the conclusion, the study concludes that leadership and climate drive inclusive education, that policy implementation depends on governance quality. And of course, inclusive education, therefore, is turns policy into practice. And for the recommendation, these are our recommendations. The leadership development must focus on the following: inclusion, communication, and equitable governance. Teachers also should sustain collaboration through learning action cells and reflective practice. DepEd should institutionalize inclusion metrics and allocate consistent support for school based implementation. On behalf of my research partner, I would like to conclude by emphasizing that inclusive education begins with leaders who lead with empathy, equity, and vision. When school leaders act with empathy, fairness, and shared purpose, they turn Department of Education's inclusive policies into living realities in the classroom. Through policy-driven educational governance, we can assure that every Filipino learner experiences a school that is equitable, compassionate, and transformative. Once again, thank you very much.